I don't know how much Michael talked yesterday about the alleged chemical attack in Syria. Right now, the UN Security Council is meeting to discuss the situation there. I know there are members of this audience who are quite convinced that this is all a false flag operation drummed up by white helmets.
Some of the same actors involved who were at Newtown, of course.
And actors. But it certainly appears, and this is according to a UK-based monitoring group, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, maybe they're wrong, that 20 children and 52 adults were killed in a chemical incident in Khan Sheikhoun in the Idlib province. Now, Russia apparently is objecting to the draft resolution on the chemical weapons death in northern Syria. Their argument is that civilians were poisoned by rebel weapons on the ground, which were exploded. That explanation has been widely rejected.
Wait, so in other words, there was a Syrian Air Force strike that was conventional weapons, and then they hit a depot of chemical weapons that were being held by terrorists? That's what Russia's saying?
Not necessarily chemical weapons, but an area where there would be chemicals.
Okay. Makes perfect sense.
I guess possible, highly unlikely.
Yeah.
But, and here's the point. Obviously, the Obama administration did not have a terribly successful Syrian policy. But I contend that there may never have been a successful Syrian policy possible for this country. There are some wars, some things that happen around the world that we don't have the ability to fix by virtue of being the United States. I suspect that we probably armed some members of the resistance whom we regret to a certain extent at this point, perhaps, but I don't believe that we did so massively. And of course, to the extent that Obama drew this red line, there was supposedly a deal to get Syria to stop using these. They had not used them in the 4 years since that incident. And here's the point. Now, again, this is an alleged attack. We don't know. But having an actual State Department, having actual professional, experienced diplomats is really, really important, and probably more important than lay people like ourselves can understand. Because the smallest nuance in what is said and done on an international level reverberates in a way that I just don't think that we can fully understand and appreciate. These are very sensitive situations. So, as reported, I don't know, a week ago, Tillerson was in Ankara.
Ankara, yeah.
And I don't know if there was any reporters who were allowed to actually go there. But here's how CNN reported on it. U.S. signals openness to Assad staying put. The Trump administration doubled down on Thursday on prioritizing the fight against ISIS over ending the Syrian civil war and getting rid of its main protagonist, President Bashar al-Assad. Suggestion that was swiftly criticized by hawks on the Hill. Now, understand, this is probably not terribly different in practice from what the Obama administration policy was. But when you talk about emphasis, when you signal a shift just in your rhetoric, even if it doesn't imply that you're going to do anything different, it may imply that you will not, that your threshold for acting has changed. As they write, indicating a possible shift in U.S. policy on the war in Syria from the days of the Obama administration. That's the point. These things are so nuanced that you can't clearly say this is a clear break from. It's indicating a possible shift. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said on a trip to Turkey that the, quote, longer-term status of President Assad will be decided by the Syrian people. So that implies the U.S. doesn't have a desire to see him go. Now, there's a difference between having a desire to see him go and saying, we have such a strong desire that we're actually going to participate in getting him to go. And then there's like probably a half a dozen other sort of functional positions you can take in between those two things I just said. These are shades of gray, ladies and gentlemen, and we don't know.
But that's how diplomacy happens.
That's the point.
Yeah, right, in shades of gray. Yeah.
That's the point. Nikki Haley told Wire reporters last Thursday, our priority is no longer to sit and focus on getting Assad out. In other words, we're not even going to think about it anymore. Do we think he's a hindrance? Yes. Are we going to sit there and focus on getting him out? No. Now, we don't know if this change in policy, or at least the change in the threshold in which to do something about Assad, then gets translated to Assad as like, maybe I can get away with some more stuff than I thought I could.
I think that's clear. And just the other implication, too, is that this is pretty similar in practice to what Obama was doing functionally but not saying, like you're saying. But the other difference is that there was a failed but somewhat of a diplomatic process happening, which we kind of were letting Russia basically lead. And you could get to a scenario where you could basically say, like, the Alawites, the groups that Assad supposedly represents, are going to be protected and part of any power sharing agreement. But maybe he specifically and people around him, just as other factions that have committed war crimes, maybe they're not going to be part of an end scenario. I mean, that's another shift when you start specifically saying this guy specifically can stay versus the interests that he represents will be taken care of.
Right. The piece goes on to say if the U.S. does definitively abandon the policy of requiring Assad's departure, a position articulated by the Obama administration, it will put its policy closer in line with Russia, which supports Assad, and at odds with allies in Europe and Turkey, where Tillerson downplayed frictions that are already straining that alliance. The point being is that we don't know if these completely inexperienced, freshly minted diplomats, one of whom had great familiarity with the world from the perspective of someone who wanted to extract resources from specific places, and one of whom, speaking of Nikki Haley, who closest diplomatic, I think, deal was to get the rebel flag down from the South Carolina State House. We don't know if they meant to signal something like this. We don't know if this was taken by Assad, and we don't know what they're going to do now. So, you know, just have an awareness that this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. I don't know what else to tell you beyond that. Hey, folks, Sam Seder here. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses. And one way he can is by you subscribing to this channel. I don't know how that works.